Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This is a nonfiction book about the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, as well as the serial killer H. Holmes, who was active in Chicago at the same time. I buddy read this with cozy reader Kelly, who I will link down below. I gave this book 3 stars, and I was honestly kind of a little disappointed by this because I do love Erik Larson. He's a wonderful writer, a wonderful researcher. I have read a couple of his books now, and I wanted to adore this book, but I just didn't. It fell flat for me in a couple of different ways. And the first is that I think this book is kind of mismarketed. It's called The Devil in the White City, which to me implies that it's going to be largely about H. Holmes, or at the very least, it's going to be equally about H. Holmes, and it really wasn't. This story splits the narrative between the Chicago World's Fair and H. Holmes. There's really not much overlap there, and I would say that Holmes really only takes up about a third of the story. Most of it is about the World's Fair. That's where the focal point of this narrative is, which is fine. I just wish it had been marketed at that because I think that kind of tempers your expectations of what you're getting into. I think if you're picking this book up looking for the true crime aspect, you're going to be disappointed because that's not where the bulk of the story is. This is mostly a story about the World's Fair, how it came to be, in almost excruciating detail at times. I struggled a lot more with the World's Fair sections just because it did feel like there was so much information, so many details, that I was drowning in it. At the end, Larson says that he took some inspiration from Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and I 1000% believe that because this book was just as detailed as In Cold Blood was. And it was kind of a little bit difficult for me to read because of that, just because it was so well done in that regard, but it was also so much, and it was hard for me to wrap my head around the information when it came to the World's Fair. Kelly gave this book 4 stars and she enjoyed it more than me, and I think she had an easier time with that. She's also lived in Chicago before, so I think that helped her appreciate that aspect a little more because she said she could picture certain things. I couldn't. I've been to Chicago, but not since I was like 6 probably, so I have no idea about anything in Chicago. That section was very rough for me. There was so much that was fascinating about the fair. He talked at length about a man named Ferris who invented the Ferris wheel, and that was fascinating. I loved learning about that. There was just so much other detail, so much like bureaucratic red tape and stuff like that that I really struggled with that aspect. I will say also that because there were 2 different stories essentially in this book that had very little overlap, it almost felt like I was reading 2 different books, and honestly, to me, neither of them felt fully formed. It felt like I was reading 2 parts of stories, but not one entire story together. And I feel like if he had just picked one or the other and gone with that as the narrative, it would have been a much better story. It would have been so much stronger. Just the construction of it kind of let it down a bit. And to me, I have no idea about this. This is just my speculation, but it felt like he wanted to write a book about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. That was what he had researched, that was what he wanted to do. And then his publishers or someone told him that that wasn't very marketable and he needed a marketable aspect to the book, so he just threw in the H. Holmes bits. I think if you had took out H. Holmes and made this entirely about the World's Fair and fleshed it out a little more, I think it could have been a much stronger story because as much as I was interested in H. Holmes just as a serial killer, it's kind of interesting to read about serial killers. I like true crime. Those bits were definitely weaker. It was very well researched. It was still well done. Erik Larson is still a great writer, but it didn't feel like his heart was really in those sections. It felt like those were more of an obligation that he was writing in order to market this book as about a serial killer so more people would read it. This was one of the few times where I was actually grateful for short alternating narrative chapters because we really switched between the World's Fair and H. Holmes pretty much every other chapter almost. Normally that bothers me a lot and I don't like it in books, but I feel like in this it really did help me get through the book because if I'd had to sit through 50 straight pages on the World's Fair, I don't know that I could have done that. It was kind of dry to me. There was so much information and I struggled with those sections a lot. I don't think they were poorly done. I just think it was not something that I was entirely interested in. Although, if you're looking for kind of a comprehensive book about the 1893 World's Fair, I can't recommend this enough. Like, it was wonderfully done. There is so much information. You will learn so much. I can't think of anything else that would have near as much information all gathered together. So, if you're interested in the World's Fair and how it was built, definitely check this out. I will say the one thing that disappointed me a lot about the World's Fair, and I think what made it feel like it was kind of lacking in that section of the story, was how little of this book actually took place while the fair was open. There was so much preparation for the fair and getting it built and like getting permission for it, deciding to do it, the literal building process. There was so much of that. But then when the fair was open, I really wanted to see more of what it was like. I wanted beautiful descriptions of what all the buildings were like and all the food and everything that was going on. But we never really got that. There were really only a couple of chapters where the fair was open until it closed again, and I was very disappointed by that. I really wanted more about the fair itself because while it was being built, sure, that was fine, but I wanted to know more about it as it was open too. And I think that was something Kelly agreed about, that it would have been so interesting to hear about the fair while it was open, and what we got was kind of limited. That was really one point in the book where I would have appreciated more of his excruciating detail. Overall, this was interesting and informative and worthwhile, and I would recommend if you're interested in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. If you're interested in H.H. Holmes, this is probably still worthwhile for you, but just keep in mind that that's only about a third of the book, although the information on Holmes is really well researched, really well done. Erik Larson is really fabulous when it comes to writing and researching these things, but I just think this book let me down a little bit in the construction of it. However, I'm still very glad I read it, and I would still recommend if it sounds like something that would be interesting to you. Let me know down below if you've read The Devil in the White City and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.